Thank you so much for asking me to come and talk, and to Noah's Ark and to John in particular. It has been an extremely exciting week that I've spent here. I've never had the opportunity where somebody said, come and take your work and work with us as we create it and make it ours. And it has been an awesome experience. I have learned so much from the Noah's Ark and Nicola's program, sorry, the staff that she had there in terms of trying to take the work that we've been doing, which fits in our culture, but making it real to fit into your environment, in your context, in your words. And unfortunately, what you're going to see today is mine. You're not going to see the product of the last 4 or 5 days that we've been working on, at least yet. I just didn't feel comfortable trying to take the changes that although I did redo 4 or 5 slides because I didn't like the wording and they gave me more depth and more understanding about something, so I have modified my things. But it basically is the work that Carl Dunst and I have done in this area over the last few years. I want to say thank you to Tim Moore. He is one of the thinkers that has influenced our work over the years. And again, he's up here presenting stuff and I'm going, oh my gosh, I need to think about that. I really need to think about that. But I didn't have time to change slides before Tim got me up here, before John got me up here. So I didn't incorporate any of his stuff, but I'm sure much of it will be because it's really good background sort of things. Now, one of the things that Carl and I have been working on a lot in the last few years is how to train people to really change practices. What's involved in that training process to really change practices. And it came out of a funded project that we had from the federal government where we were trying to get people to be more involved in helping children with disabilities in all kinds of settings learn early literacy, have early literacy experiences and skills and that sort of stuff. And part of what we were commissioned to do was to provide training and change behaviors in the field. Well, today is not how you do that, okay? So I do not expect this type of training is great. It provides information and some context, and I'm gonna make you do some work just because I'm too lazy to fill up all this time myself. So you're gonna have to do some work, but it is not enough to really change behavior. For people to really change the behavior that they're going to do in terms of working with children, it takes much more effort than what we're going to do today. And Tim talked about a lot of that, and so I'm going to sort of move forward. If I think I've got all this moving forward. So we're going to be focusing on early learning. I may say literacy because this other project was a literacy project, and it just flows right. Early literacy learning just keeps coming out of my mouth when I really just mean early learning. We just had a focus on literacy for that. And about capacity building practices. I'm going to talk a lot about child's interest and everyday activities and how you increase the opportunities within those activities for children to actively be involved and to learn new things. As I step through these different sections, we're going to stop and have you, the way the agenda was set out, it looked like I was going to do a full presentation and then you were going to talk about some challenges and that sort of stuff. We're going to break that up and I'm going to mix that up as I'm doing the presentation so that you're going to talk a little bit with the people sitting near you about some things. I'm going to give you some activities, some practices to make you kind of think and then to reflect on sort of what I'm trying to say and see where you have questions about it. So it's going to be a little different than what we had originally laid out. So one of the ways that Carl and I think about some of this stuff, and again, it's very similar to the kinds of things that both John and Tim were talking about, is the how you do something. So the implementation, for us, it's capacity building practices. And that's, again, a lot of what Tim has talked about. How do you work with somebody in a way, whether it's a parent, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a child, in a way that they come out feeling confident and competent about their abilities to be able to do something. So how you do that work is one part of what you have to have in your bag of tricks. But the other part is content. What are you going to do? What is the intervention practice that you're trying to do? And in this case, we're talking about interest-based everyday activity practices. So it's the how you're going to do it and the what it is that you're going to do. And both of those pieces have to be part of your repertoire. When I started in early intervention, a really long time ago, they keep telling me Carl was here in the 1990s, and I was like, oh, are we really that old? That was the early 90s when he was here. But when we started out in this field, we really just thought about what were the practices. What is it that you did with children? But now we've changed. The field has moved to how do we work with other people to be able to do those practices. That's a big shift, and you need to get that kind of clear in your head. Your goal is not just to have the children doing these things. Your goal is to help someone else be able to help the children do these things for all the reasons that Tim said about repeated practice, and I'm going to get a little redundant with some of that. So in this situation, I had to decide whether I need glasses or not here. In this situation, the implementation practices are evidence-based, capacity building, participatory practices. A lot of words there. Evidence-based, first of all, do we have some research behind what we're talking about? And the answer is yes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today. And then the capacity building, that you're trying to build someone else's ability to actively be involved in working with the children that they're working with. To promote skills and knowledge. And that's important. We want skills and knowledge to be part of it, but that's not the end goal. We really want this sense of confidence and competence in being able to do it. So we really want that parent, we really want that teacher to maybe not need us as much as in the past we might have been needed. And that's kind of a shift for a lot of people, changing that paradigm around. It's not about me being able to accomplish something, it's about somebody else. And my personal reinforcement is the twinkle in somebody else's eye when they figure out how to do it. And they feel like they can do it themselves, as opposed to my getting a child to be able to do it. So this is a real important aspect of this. And then the practices that we really want to do is the caregiver's adoption and use of evidence-based. Again, these are practices that have a lot of research behind them. Interest-based everyday learning activities with adaptations that are necessary to enhance the child's full participation in the activity in order for them to feel confident and competent. And again, this is building very much on what Tim says in terms of the same principles apply. I'm not going to take a lot of time over this slide, but I just want you to look at the capacity building model side of it. Again, words, I didn't see his presentation beforehand. I really didn't. But words like promotion, words like empowerment, words like strengths-based, resource-based, family-centered, all of those are what makes up this new paradigm that we need to be envisioning and embracing in terms of how we're going to work with folks, both children and with the staff, with teachers and with parents. We're going to promote development. We're not just trying to fix or treat something. We're trying to promote new development and new growth. We want people to come away feeling really good. They can really do this. And we start by building on somebody's strengths. Where are they? What can they do already? And how do we build on that? Resources are important, and of course, family-centered. And so to us, family-centered practices is just a special case of capacity building, help-giving practices. It emphasizes empowering families and family members and both strengthening and promoting their sense of confidence and competence. So family-centered practices, when you're thinking about parents, is the way we talk about this. But again, as Tim says, it goes for working within any relationships. Again, Tim said so much of this, that you're talking about treating families with dignity and respect, providing family members with information needed to make informed decisions and choices, active involvement of the family in procuring resources and supports, and involving and having a practitioner that's flexible and responsive to families' needs and desires. We kind of think of it in these two sections. We think of it in terms of relational practices, meaning the trust, building that relationship. But that is not it is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition to get somebody to feel like they really can do it themselves. And that's where the participatory part comes in. They have to be doing it, and you have to be supporting their ability to do it, or they're not going to come away with this sense of, I can do it. So there's in the States, the last few years, there's been all this focus on relationships and building relationships. We totally believe that that's an important part of it. But we believe that that's not enough if your goal is if what your outcome is the sense of confidence and competence. The other thing that we believe is that we believe that using participatory, you've got to have some relationship, but you can pretty quickly move into a participatory set of interactions with somebody once you have some trust going. And that you don't, we found people who were spending months building a relationship and not doing anything except getting to know that person and spending time with them. And that is important, but by the way that you interact with somebody in a participatory manner, when you give somebody choice and say, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to help you do that, you're demonstrating respect. You're demonstrating your understanding that they're competent and capable. So it doesn't have to be, oh, this is phase 1 and now we're moving into phase 2. We feel like that doing them together is the way that you can really get the relationship going and working quickly. We've done lots and lots of research in this area, and one of the funniest things that we learned was interviewing families, and they would say, oh yeah, I really like them, they're so nice and they're so respectful, but they don't do anything. And it's like, you know, it's really nice, but I don't have time for people who aren't going to do anything or help me do anything, because they were and it was our staff that was doing it, spending way too much time on just trying to get to know the family instead of saying, we can do that, get to know you, and then we can start building pretty quickly and moving forward. So the help giving is really not the main focus of what I wanted to talk about today, but you have to understand that that's the context of everything that I'm doing. And why we're talking about doing things in a certain manner is because we're building the capacity of somebody else. We're not doing it, we're building the capacity of a teacher or a parent to be able to do it. So, I have circles. You will not have circles in the stuff that comes out of the work that we did. They didn't like my circles at all. So I don't know what their visual is going to be, but it will not be this visual that you see when you finally get the products that we've developed or that we're developing from the work that we did. But for me, it's helpful to sort of sort the conversation out a little bit. So we're going to start with child interest. So all children, all people have interests with or without disabilities or preferences. And we think about them in two ways. We think about personal interest and we think about situational interest. So personal interests are the likes, the preferences of a person that influence their participation and engagement in different activities or events. So I love music. So, you know, there's always music going. It's different kinds of music, but there's always music going, even in being here in Australia. There's been a radio going every time I've gotten into my room because music is a strong personal interest of mine. So it's my preference as opposed to somebody else who may not enjoy music and would be very happy in the quiet, or it would be TV or something else. They are things that children like to do, that they enjoy doing, that gets them to smile and laugh or get a child excited. That's how you know what a child's interests are. And that's important because part of what you've got to do is figure out what a child's interest is. So what is the behavior that you're going to be looking for in order to determine that? And with children with certain types of disabilities, that can be a real challenge to be able to help somebody identify that. So understanding the behavior that you're looking at is important in terms of what we're going to be doing later. We feel that, well, I'll get there. If you've seen Carl Dunce, you've probably seen these cartoons, but I love them too, so I have to use them also. So Dennis the Menace is saying, I had a choice between staying clean or having fun. You know, and so dirt and mud was definitely Dennis's perception of what he's all about. So children make choices about what they're going to do, and how they make those choices is an indicator to you about things that they're interested in terms of what they'll choose to do. Now, situational interests, I think, are something that we think about much more. And situational interests are things that become interesting because of their, like a parade going down a street. A child may not have a personal interest in that, but with all that noise and all that color and everything, they're going to be drawn to it. In daycare centers or child classrooms, we make our centers situationally interesting by adding new things, by mixing it up, that sort of thing. And so a lot of times people say, oh, I'm interest-based. But what they really are talking about is they're using situational interest, not the child's personal interest, to develop learning. And situational interests are great, and they can lead to increasing children's exposure and actually learning other things that they're very interested in. So I'm not saying it's one or the other, but so often what we really end up looking at is situational interest instead of stopping and saying, yeah, but is that really this child's personal interest? Sometimes with children, particularly children with challenges, a situational interest will capture them for a minute, but it will not really hold their attention for very long because it's not a personal interest. And so they kind of flit in and flit out. And, you know, it's like, whoa, wait, where was that moment of learning that was going to happen in that? Because they really wouldn't get engaged in it. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I love this cartoon. So which object is the baby most interested in? The $40 stuffed bear, the $25 gem, the $30 quality blanket, or the dead fly? So this is a situational interest, you know. Okay, so I'm going to start making you work right now. We're not going to sit here and just be passive. Active learning is an important ingredient. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to encourage some active learning going on. So I want you to think about a child with a disability that you know. And I want you to seriously think about a child because you're going to use this same child repeatedly as we move through a couple of other phases. So I want you to stop and think about a child that you know pretty well, that you've had some experience with. And I want you to, if you want to do it in a small group of 3 or 4 or just with the person sitting right beside you, I'm sorry we don't have tables set up, which would have really facilitated this better. But I want you to talk to the person beside you about who that child is and answer these questions. What holds the child's attention? What are some of the child's favorite things? What makes a child laugh or smile? What things are especially exciting to the child? And what things, well, I didn't do well with that last one, that the child chooses to do most often. So think about a child. You're going to have about 5, maybe 10 minutes to do this. And then we're going to stop, and I want you to think about, after that, I'm going to give you some questions to reflect on what that experience taught you in terms of children's learning. But this is the first thing. So I'm timing. I'm going to try to bring you back together. All right, that was not hard. I do like working with people from Australia. You just jump right in and do it, and I love it. Okay, so now what I want you to do is, and we're going to kind of do this as a big group instead of breaking back into smaller groups, is I want you to think about these questions a little bit. I want you to reflect on what you really just did in terms of this process. And think about, you know, was there something you learned about the child's interest that was new to you? Or how did the process of identifying the child's interest make you feel? What surprised you? What other questions could we have used? Let's leave the last one down for first and think about the first 3. So let's hear somebody's reaction to one of those first 3 questions, or just sort of what was it like? I would say it was easy, just given your, yeah, go ahead.
It's a really nice feeling to think, yes, I do know that child. I've really observed and I understand that child.
Great.
And I can say something about it.
Yeah, and those are 2 important, this notion of observing a child so you really understand what a child's interest is. One of those strategies that's real important is to help people be able to observe, because so often nobody's ever stopped long enough to really know, to watch a child, what their choices are, what they choose to do in terms of what they really like. That's a great comment. Is that a hand?
It led me to think about the issue of
Can you hear?
our judgments and our way to sort things and to label things, and the way that sometimes we watch somebody and say, he doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
He's not interesting, or he would just do these aimless things.
Uh-huh.
And that really blocks
Right.
us from.
Right. So beginning to change that frame around, to start looking for what it is that he is interested in and what he is a pull to, and even if he's one of these kids that's wandering around in the room kind of bouncing from one, well, what is it that he pulls to? What does he stop at and look at? Those are beginning to identify things that might be interesting to that child. Yeah, great observation. Oh, come on. You were talking like crazy. Give me another one. Each child's interest was different. It's not something that you can really generalize across children very easily, which is a challenge when we get into classrooms. And we'll talk about that some later today, is that when you're trying to think of a group of children, really being interest-based for that group of children, as opposed to just saying, oh, it's Christmas, we're going to do Christmas themes, is a challenge. It's harder to do. Yeah?
It was easier for us, I think, because we chose a child that we'd seen not just in one place. We'd seen him not just at home, but we'd seen him before, we'd seen him out in the community, in a music group. That made it easier, whereas if you've only seen a child in one setting, it makes it much harder.
Excellent comment, excellent comment. That when you have only seen a child in one context, that it's much harder to do than when you've seen them in the community, at home, in different environments, which is one of the reasons mothers and families and dads are so important, because they have seen that child in lots and lots of contexts that you may not have been able to see, and therefore you've got to rely on them to get the information, even if you're a classroom teacher. I mean, it's one thing if you're working with the family, clearly, but even as a classroom teacher, to get that information from those folks who are really with that child all the time is really invaluable. Or you got to get pretty sophisticated with technology and take movies of people all over, the kids all over the place and that sort of stuff. But there's some fun things to do with that too, in terms of identifying children's interest using technology is a really fun thing to do, and it's fun for families often because they're showing off what their kids can do. And that's always something parents want to do. Other comments, reactions? Yeah.
We talked about it a little. We learned that maybe the mother or the parent didn't want to foster it, even though they knew they were interested in it, didn't want to foster it because it was weird or different or obsessional.
Yeah, okay. The washing machine. Okay, that is a very good point, and it is important, not only in terms of thinking about children's interests, but particularly when we get into thinking about activities, that the activities need to be ones that work for the people who are in that situation, and that either is a teacher or for a parent. And there are reasons that things don't work sometimes, that certain activities don't work. And if that mother was out in public, at a laundromat, and her child's obsession with sort of the rotation of it, that made him look different, and that was not what she was going to do. But to think about what other things might have the same thing. Is it the noise? Is it the movement around? What is it that he's so captured by in that situation? And then how might you find something that he could do that was more appropriate and didn't make him look so different from the mother's perspective would be a really important thing. And to help her begin to break down what is it within that activity that is kind of catching him. It probably isn't the washing machine. It's probably the noise or the sounds or something like that. And there are other ways you can find those things. Who knows? Maybe it's a tape of a washing machine noise or something else that can be done But anyway, we'll get to activities in a little bit. But that's a great observation, and it's very important. And the same thing's true for teachers. It's not just parents that you've got to think about that for. Anything else? Well, what other questions could you use to help you identify a child's interest that I didn't mention? Were there other things that you thought of that you said, oh, that would have been that was a way that I was thinking about this child that produced something that I hadn't thought about? I'm trying to push you to think about the process that we just used. Yeah?
By asking other people to parent in greater detail in the same way that we reflected on that, helps them to engage in the process that they've done, do it over and over again.
Yep.
And use it on an everyday basis.
That's right. So breaking it down so that you're helping them see what it is that you're doing with them so that they can be able to continue to do it over and over. One of the things that the group came up with was they got into making things the last few days as we've worked together, and they want to make a magnet with questions that you can have to sort of stimulate people being able to think about what a child's interest is. And they want a magnet on the refrigerator at home, and they want a poster in the daycare center. But it's with the questions that would keep people thinking about what is it that this child is really interested in. And how can I keep looking for that on and on? And that's really important because we do it one time and we think we've got it. But guess what? Kids' interests change. They change all the time. My interests change, your interest. The older I get, the less my interests change. But when I was really young, they changed a whole lot. And it's really true for young children that their interests change a lot. So we don't do this one time at the initial assessment and say it's done. We don't do it once a year and say it's done. We need to be doing it all the time because it'll be constant movement and constant changes that you need to pay attention to. So that's the next point. Yes?
I think one of the things that comes to me to say is how often have I sat back and watched that child?
Yes.
How on what sort of regular basis?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
to myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And again, that observation, that sitting back and watching and really thinking about. And I think that's, again, whether you're a classroom teacher or whether you're a parent, how often does a parent stop and really tune into that? Are you kidding me? There's too much going on every day. There are 3 other kids and yada, yada, yada. But to help a parent understand how important that is and has permission to stop and think about and watch their child at the park, inside, just with free play, just with getting anything, just watching them to see what they're interested in and how you can build on that. All right, I'm moving on. I'm trying to be very careful of time here. So why are children's interests so important? And again, this builds a lot on what Tim talked about. Children are more likely to become engaged in an activity if they're interested in it, which increases the opportunities for them to learn. Children's interests form the basis of their learning, and this is the basis for early learning practices. I like this model. They actually like my model here. This one was okay. You may see this one again. I think of it as the cycle of mastery in terms of you start with a child's interest that is exhibited in everyday learning activities or routines. By the way, when I use the term activities, you can do routine/activities. Routines tend to be sort of, in my mind, and this is just my definition, kind of more the everyday breakfast, bath time, and we're trying to expand it a little bit to think more about other activities besides just routines like being at the football game with your brother on a Saturday morning while he's practicing and you're there. Well, that's an activity. Well, what is that? What can that look like in terms of a child's interest? How can that activity be something? So we're trying to broaden it beyond sort of the routines to think about activities that occur all the time. And we'll talk about frequency in a minute. But the notion is that if a child is interested in it, they get in there and they mess around with it. They get engaged. They get themselves all wrapped up in it. And the more they do that, the more they practice, the more competent they get at whatever it is, whether it's dumping sand in and out of a box or tying their shoes or whatever. The more they do it, and the more you get this mastery. They actually learn how to do something, they master that skill, and then they move on to something else. Sometimes now they are going to modify this because they wanted to show that leads to other interests. So they're going to put another line in this group. So it's going to be a modified version because they didn't like it all the way back around. Because it does lead to other interests. It often leads to other interests. Not just that one, but to new interests that happen. So children's master new behaviors faster if they're interested in the experience that promote these behaviors. Engagement is participating in the activity that is interesting and helps them engage the child in the experience. It's active participation. You're going to hear me say active participation 2 million times in the next hour and a half because that is the key to how children learn. They have to be actively involved in the learning. It's not a sitting back and watching process. That's the whole point, is you need them to be actively involved. And that is the heart of the challenge with children with disabilities, is that so often they're there observing, passively observing the activity instead of being actively involved. And that is where our expertise really begins to kick in. It is how do we help that child be actively involved in that activity so that they can really learn from what it is that they do. And that's where our knowledge, our specialties kind of kick in about how we can help position a child. We're going to talk about adaptations, which is essentially how are you going to ensure that child is actively involved in that activity. Competence develops, again, through the frequent child participation. Another key factor here is we want these things to happen a lot. We want kids to have lots and lots of chances at this. So we're not interested as much when you're talking about focusing on children's learning as the activity that happens once or twice a month. We're really interested in the activity that happens once or twice a week, because that way the child is going to have more and more chances in order to learn it. And then mastery is once a child achieves sufficient competence in the task, they try something else. So again, some of Carl's old cartoons. And there's an ant under that rock, and it says, "I'll quit when it stops being fun." You know, how many times is it that we can't get a child to stop something because they're so read that same book 400 times that you've already read to them, but it's the one they love and they want to hear it again and again and again. Or this one, I find the work truly fulfilling in many ways. There's the exercise, the sense of accomplishment, but most important, the opportunity to make a lot of noise. So, I want to talk just a minute about research. I am a researcher and I have to throw in a little bit, but not too much. But I think that people don't understand the power behind the interest-based learning. So this is a research study that we did a few years ago where we compared two types of strategies. Excuse me. Carl and I don't often do randomized control studies because we work in the real world, and that doesn't tend to lead to you get to separate children in this group versus that group very often. But in this case, we actually did randomly assign families to different studies, to different conditions. And the two conditions were this. One was an interest-based learning, where they identified what it was that a child really liked to do and how many times they could provide that opportunity in a week, and the plan was nothing more than that child gets to participate in this activity, 3 or 4 times a week. And they asked families about how we asked families about how often they were able to participate and the degree to which the children really engaged in it and had fun in it and enjoyed it and that sort of stuff. The other group, we said, think of a skill that you want your child to learn. So it was much more the traditional perspective of, well, I want him to learn how to feed himself or put his coat on or whatever it was. And then what are the activities? So we were still using activities as the context in which the learning occurred, that he could practice those frequently during the week. So those were the two conditions. One, it was this open-ended, we're gonna do the stuff he loves a lot. And the other was, we're going to teach a skill as part of an activity that goes on every day. And we had a developmental checklist that we used. And so this is what we found. First of all, not surprisingly, children learn in both conditions. Children learn in that other condition of teaching a skill. There's no doubt about that. But the bottom line is the family-directed learning, where they were trying to teach a child a certain skill and using everyday activities. But if you look at the rate of the slant of the other line, that's the rate at which the children learned when you were just having them be involved in activities that they were really interested in and allowing them to be really involved in participating in those activities. And so what you see is that the rate of learning increased substantially in terms of the interest-based one. And if you project this out, that's what you get over. That was a 3-month study that we did where we found those rates. This is projecting it out over 12 months, and what you see is that the rate of learning is much higher and much faster than it is when you stay at the skill-based level. It's pretty powerful stuff. And for our kids for whom learning is such a struggle, these are kids with disabilities. These were kids with all the range of disabilities in there. And when you allow them to learn based on an interest, and not everything in life is interest-based, as Tim says. I mean, there's some things you just have to do, and you have to hold my hand crossing the street, and you brush your teeth, and you have to have some good nutrient food in your body. You can't all eat junk food. But we're not talking about everything. We're talking about when we're focusing on children's learning. We're talking about those opportunities where we really want kids to be learning. And so when you do that and you use this approach, it's a pretty impressive rate of learning that occurs. And to me, it's incredibly exciting because it's not that hard. You're talking about starting where kids really want to be. And so, okay, how many times do you have behavior problems when you're starting with what a kid really wants to do? Not very often. Occasionally, yes, because there's some of them that are just, that way. But if it's really something they want to do, then they're going to be all there with you. And if you're there with them in terms of supporting their learning and encouraging their development as part of that activity, the kind of learning that can occur is phenomenal. It's so easy to forget this piece of the pie. It's so easy to say it doesn't matter whether he really likes it or not, he needs to do it anyway. It's so easy to think, oh, well, I'll just make it situationally interesting. But when you make it interesting based on what they want to do, then you've got them. And you can go places with them. And clearly the data supports that there's great growth that can happen as a function of this. So that's my little spill on data, but to me it is just so strong. And when I'm working with people and they say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm just gonna, we're gonna go do this. I just want to go back and say, no, look here at what the growth levels can be for kids with disabilities when you give them these opportunities in this context. So this is the mastery of cycle. Again, let me just be sure where I am. Okay, I'm going to go back one more time here. And so we have interest, engagement, competence, and mastery. So we're going to practice again. I told you I was going to break you up. I'm not going to make you just sit here. So now now that you've seen it, and I hope you believe in the power of it, I want you to take a child, one of the children, you probably won't get through all of the ones you talked about, but one of those children, and I want you to think about an interest and how you have seen that interest lead to engagement, and how you've seen that engagement lead to mastery, and how you've seen that happen in terms of then leading to competence in that child. That's why I chose you to pick somebody you really knew, a child you really knew. I don't want you to make it up. I want you to describe something that you've actually witnessed as part of, as some child that you've worked with. And if you have to pick another one other than the one you started with, that's okay. But think about this cycle in the phases and talk with your group or neighbors or whatever, and feel free to rearrange chairs if you want to. And I may give you a little more than 5 minutes for this one. This one is a little harder and it's going to require you to think a little bit more. But think about a child and think about interest, engagement, mastery, and competence. And the time is ticking. Can we, I'm getting nothing. Can we wrap up? There we go. Now I'm getting it. So somebody pointed out that in my previous slide I had reversed competence and mastery. That's what happens when you're working on a teeny tiny computer late at night, as opposed to, so in the other one I had reversed the kind of the cycle here. But let me get one group to just quickly walk through what they did in terms of one example. Oh, come on. You were all talking, so I assume you have good examples. Somebody give us an example. I'll pick on somebody. Yes, thank you. Hot dog. Can you stand up and turn around? Sarah, okay. Well, you don't have to have a mic. But, okay. Okay, all right. But you got to at least turn around so you're talking to them so they can hear you, okay? Yeah, please talk loudly.
I'm not sure how to talk loudly. We talked about a child that we have worked with who's interested in things that move and mechanical things. So his mum decided it would be a good idea to take advantage of that and teach him how to ride a bike. And so she organised a bike with lots of support and all those sorts of things. It wasn't great with sitting up straight, etc. And I guess the confidence or the engagement was certainly there. The confidence was about him learning how to pedal and steer and his master.
And he did. Cool. Very cool. Very cool. Part of the reason for, oh, she's going to want me to go back over where I was. Part of the reason for having you go through this is it's really important to be able to explain this to somebody else. You know, it's John's comment about we got to have the language to translate it to someone else. You may inherently know this, but until you have to stop and sort of look at it and say, oh, that's engagement and that's really what you're looking for, Mom. You really want him to be spending time doing it, and look at how he's learned something new, that you're helping that transfer of information to somebody else. It feels pretty intuitive, but you got to put words around it for somebody else to sort of get it. Yeah, yeah.
We actually we found it difficult to initially work out what his interests might be. It was about Mum deciding that that was a skill.
Yeah.
And we sort of broke that down and decided that actually Mum might put together a whole heap of things about his child to come to the conclusion that he should learn how to ride a bike.
Right.
And when we did start talking about that, we talked about he does like movement and he likes watching cars and trucks and all those
Right,
things.
right.
She had put that together.
She had sort of intuitively thought about the fact that this is, I mean, bike riding is not, you know, an essential skill to survive in the rest of the world like some things are. So, you know, it was something she thought he would enjoy probably based on the fact that he liked these other things. But again, helping her recognize that's how she got to that so that she understands the skill that she used in order to move forward with it in the future as things change is very, very important of the capacity building kinds of things. So other reactions to that, either these are some questions I wondered is, did you find it easy or difficult? What did you find easy or difficult about the process? Did you find it difficult? Well, the first thing you found was figuring out what the child's interest was and trying to really understand that. Was it easy to do? Yeah?
It was a little bit hard for me. I found that sometimes when you're starting with the child's interests, you're not really sure where you're heading.
Right.
The competence that you're trying to encourage.
That's right. But the data says that's okay, that you don't have to be sure. But that's a big shift for the way we think about it because we immediately go to teaching a skill. And so according to the data, you don't have to worry about that because that line says it's going to happen anyway. Whether you've identified what the skills are that are part of it, you don't need to do that. It's getting them actively involved in it. It's making them have that opportunity. That's really is, I think, very true. And I think if there's one thing that you're going to have to hold yourself accountable for, it's always going back to that. And asking the question. So many times when people say, well, it's not working, I go back and I say, my first question to you is this really based on the child's interest? You know, if the answer to that is yes, then there are other questions to go forward with. But usually the answer to that is, well, no, not really. It's just something I want them to do, you know. And then, oh, we're already into skills here. We're not talking about interest in activities where those interests get manifested. Other comments about whether it was hard or difficult? Yeah.
We were talking about a social skill that the child was really motivated by her peer group and that she couldn't communicate, but she could communicate through her activity and sitting in the group and doing the same activity, and it just happened to coincide with the fact that that was one of the parents' goals, was to be boring.
Yeah.
And then we talked about how really the mastery part of it's quite tricky because sometimes you don't even notice the mastery because it gets involved in the next
level.
process.
That's right.
And you don't see it.
That's right.
Moving on.
That's right. Very good. And again, the importance of us understanding that mastery can get lost and that we need to be able to point that out to teachers and to families, to parents. Look, she really is doing something different. We've got some things here. Yeah, she's frustrated, but it's a different thing. We're learning something new, so she's frustrated about something new. But she really has mastered something to move to that next level. Very good observation. Yeah. Yep.
Yes, I got it stuck with, if there's mastery, then there needed to have been a skill. Where we're,
Say that again now.
I got a little bit lost or a bit sort of stuck in that idea that in order for there to be mastery, there needed to be
A skill.
a skill.
But you weren't teaching that skill. That skill occurred, it happened as part of it, but you didn't just deliberately set out to teach that. And I think you're right. And there's nothing hung up on the language. It's the process in terms of it. But yeah, when we learn something new, we master some skill. Either we master, it's a physical movement or it's a knowledge movement, a knowledge thing that we learn. So we all are mastering skills and behaviors. But the point is, we didn't start out with the idea, for example, my love of music. I have learned a tremendous number I like classical music. I never have any classical training in music. I didn't grow up with it. And so as I've listened to it over the years, I've actually learned a tremendous amount about the types of classical music, about the artists and that sort of. So my skills have improved. My knowledge has improved. But I didn't set out to do that. I set out because I liked the way it made me feel.
So it's like you have to spot the order of those.
Yeah.
Skills will come.
Yeah, skills will come, absolutely. That measure, that outcome measure that we used is a skill-based developmental scale. It's whether or not kids can do things better than they could before. So it's cognitive skills and motor skills and that sort of stuff. Skills come, but they come as a result of it. And so you're right, yeah. And again, that's what you've got to understand so that you can convince other people it really will happen. Because otherwise they go, no, it won't, and I've got to back up and do this other stuff. Yeah.
And the dilemma we had was with the little boy who loved the chaser game.
Uh-huh.
And I think he was actually interested in engaging it because he had mastery over it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it was where do you start on that cycle again?
And then encourage the next level up. And that's part of what the adult role is in any kind of learning when you're talking about young children. Part of our job, and I think you use the term scaffolding a lot in terms of, so where I talk about it is raising the bar. So now that you've done that, can you do this as part of the same thing that you're doing? And that's where we really then can heighten that learning. Again, just sort of encouraging that next level. And we do it naturally all the time with kids. I mean, partly because we get bored. When you're reading a book to a kid, you don't say the same thing over and over because it's so boring to you. You're changing it up and mixing it up. Well, that changing it up and mixing it up is how they begin to learn something new as part of it. There was one more hand back there, somebody.
Well, it was me, and I think you kind of answered what I was questioning.
What?
It was just about goals and where you went with that, but you've just answered that.
Yeah, it's really a hard switch. It is a hard mental switch to stop thinking about the goals and thinking about participation as the goal. And all the other stuff will come in. And so our forms in the states are really a challenge. All the documentation is about goals and how often you date, all that sort of stuff. Drives people crazy. That's what they want to focus in on instead of the outcome is participation, and from that everything else will lead. Yeah, one more. Look over here. It's a good conversation. I don't want to stop it.
For me, it's like if you've got a family whose goal is to toilet train their child.
Yeah.
That's reconciling to.
Well, and again, toilet training your child is an important thing to do. Enhancing his learning is not really, that's toilet training, and making it as natural and part of all that sort of stuff as possible. But when you're thinking about children learning in a kind of broader sense, toilet training is one everybody says to me. It's like, yeah, that's pretty unique, I think, in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
I think you've answered it. I was going to say, it changes the way that we sit down to write goals with parents.
Yep, it really does. It changes all of that. And if the infrastructure behind what you do is, and in fact, in Noah's Ark, there are a couple of people who've been playing around with how do you write those things and how do you do them differently. And it's not easy. It's not easy because it's such a big mind switch for all of us to make and could continue to make. But it's oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a nightmare in terms of what you really want to be able to do. Okay. All right, we are going to move on. Okay, we're going to move on quickly. Everyday activities. Okay, so, and we've talked about a lot of this. I think the only thing that I want to sort of say out of this that we haven't mentioned, I just wanted that Odom and Mark Woolery's comment about children learn best through acting on and observing their environment. where the experiences afford them the opportunities to learn about, master, and control the worlds around them. That's essentially what we're talking about here, is using those activities. So we want everyday activities, and again, everyday activities / routines, okay? But the routines are harder because they are the things, in my definition, that have to happen all the time, and you can't always make them interest-based. But you want them to be interest-based. You want them to provide opportunities for the child to be an active participant in it, provide opportunities for their acquire to use abilities. Now, this learning doesn't happen if they're sitting there passively watching. This learning has to happen because they're actively engaged in it and connected with it, and happen frequently, as I've talked about. They include family, community, preschool, child care activities, experience events. They are the context of what we call natural learning environments or natural learning opportunities. And they are developed, best occur is when you understand that competence, and this is from Brenner, that competence as the mastery of culturally defined familiar activities in everyday life. One of the things, as Tim referred to, and this continues to be a struggle in our country, is this notion of cultural appropriateness. Well, when you start thinking about what it is a child's interested in and what the activities are that the family's already engaging in, you don't have to worry about it very much because you're already there. You're in their culture. You're doing it around what works for them. So yes, you have to be sensitive to it and pay attention to it, but you're already there and on that train. And then it's a matter of having that respect and listening to what they tell you and being responsive to what they really say. So I have to have a couple of pictures of cute kids, and so these are some kids who are involved in everyday activities. This is Hawaii, and I just wanted to go on record as saying I did not get to go take this picture. And I really resented the fact that I didn't get to go take this picture. But childcare, where kids are outside playing, ducks, ponds, feeding animals. You guys have got lots of great places for that here. I've been to many of your parks, and they're just awesome. Playing with a sister, big sister, playing with that movable thing. Animals, being there with friends, with peers. Shopping in a grocery store, you do a lot of that. Playing in with bubbles outside with mom. Playing in water, all the water is recycled. I just want to go on record. They got very upset with me in the group because I had water pictures that looked like kids were wasting water. And that was not okay. So you won't see that picture. Taking walks is parts of. So these are bath time. Oh, I got a lot of them. And then playing word games and sing-songy games as part of a group. All those are everyday activities, both in the context of home and community and in the context of childcare. That's pretty obvious. So what makes a good everyday activity is that its interest, it is based on a child's interest, like a child likes to stack and build. That the routines or activities must work for the caregiver. And this is something we kind of alluded to earlier, is that, we can come up with and say, well, then let him stack cans in the kitchen while mother cooks. Well, that may be okay with mother, and that may not be okay with mother, because cooking may be a time where mother needs to totally focus on getting that meal done. I'll tell you, one of the worst, when you've been around as long as I have, you've done a lot of bad things to people as part of your career. And this is one of the ones that I did. I taught children with autism many years ago, and I was green as grass. I was not married. I did not have children. I had no reason to be doing this, really, when I think about it. And so we were, and I would write these great behavioral plans. I'm coming out of this behavioral training model. I'm writing this great behavioral plans about how they need to do dinner with this child so that he can get the most out of it and he can learn to feed himself, et cetera, et cetera. And, those mothers were so nice to me, and they smiled and said, yeah, great, yeah, oh, we'll be glad to do it. And then finally one of them said, Carol, I have 3 other children and a husband that wants his dinner at 6 o'clock at night, on the table, ready to go. There is no way I am ever going to be able to do what you're just asking me to do. And I think I did that a lot to them. And it really, to me, because I didn't honor and respect what they had to say and what they knew, it was such a put down. And I wonder why they liked me, except that at that point in the continuum of services, I was the only game in town, and so, you know, they were willing to put up with me. But I think that starting from what's real and the activities that work for that family is the way you start being respectful and beginning to build on it. You know, we always think bath time is such a great routine. Some mothers, bath time is about getting clean and going to bed, and it's not about learning. It's about getting those chores done. And so thinking about where is it that mom's going to be comfortable, or where is it that a teacher's going to be comfortable. Using Legos to build a tower with another, just another activity. And then the opportunities, again, I say this because it's so important. The child has to be able to be actively involved in that opportunity, not just sitting around. And one of those things that we're going to talk a little bit about later, if I hurry, is this notion of time. Does the child have time to be actively involved? And for children with disabilities, that's often a big issue. You know, he can tie his shoe, but he's not going to tie that shoe in 2 seconds and be out the door. So getting out the door in the morning is not a good time to be trying to encourage, you know, that, and that's not an interest-based necessarily kind of an activity. But you've got to think about, do they really have time to do it and to be part of it? You know, cooking is a great one. You know, when I'm putting dinner on dinner table is not a good time to be cooking with a child who's going to make a mess and be involved and all that sort of stuff, because they don't have time to actively be involved because I'm in a hurry and got to do it. So I probably made my point. I'll move on. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about this continuum, which is this notion of formal and informal. So everyday activities can be informal or formal, and anywhere in between on the continuum. And it's not so much that you need to, it's not so much that you need to think about some magic ratio of formal to informal, but you need to recognize it's a continuum and help people understand how they can capture and use those moments in terms of learning. So informal or unstructured activities, they primarily are directed by the child and often facilitated by an adult. They tend to occur spontaneously, often in the context of another routine. So mom's standing in the grocery store in line, and there's a magazine right there, and all of a sudden the child's interest is captured about that picture, and there's this conversation going on between the mother and the child about what she's seeing and what they're doing, and this thing is happening. That's just an informal learning activity that happens all the time. We use them with other children a lot. Sometimes we forget to use them with children with disabilities, and we don't encourage mom to take advantage of that kind of informal thing that just happened right there, where she can be responsive and be, you know, he's just looking around at it, and all of a sudden he's watching it and you're responding to it. Oh, that's my example. Okay. And then more formal activities, the more structured activities where the adult has identified activities that are of interest to the child and are consistently trying to promote those activities. And they tend to be kind of planned in more learning opportunities. I think this informal and formal distinction is a very important one for child care providers or people who are working in group settings. They often miss many opportunities where they can be really captured, a child's interest is captured by something like that's maybe more situational, where they can encourage that informal learning. They tend to think of it as, I got to sit down and do something structured in order to capture that learning, at least in the States. You'd think after all these years we'd be saying that this would not be true, but it is still very much true in terms of people missing all these opportunities for learning to occur. Okay, so we're going to do this, and men, you only get 5 minutes. You only get 5 minutes this time. But to identify 4 or 5 activities that you think would work with the child, what is the activity, how often it would happen, and what do you think the child would do in an activity? I mean, just real quickly, just talk about a couple, because I am running out of time, but I want you to at least think about this child you've been thinking about, because we're going to take this one step further with adaptations. So, but I am interested in your reactions to this. Was any comments, any reactions to this? These questions or anything else in terms of doing this? What you just did, was it easy, hard? Make you think about something? Yeah.
It's hard in thinking about what the activity 5 times that you're going to do, because then you're imposing what you think those activities might be. So it's, say, 5 times in the day I'm going to listen to where the child is at and join them in that
in that play, in that interaction. Yeah. It is, and without the more about the context and that sort of stuff, it is hard to do it. And yeah, anything else? That's why that partnership with whoever you're working with is so important. That collaboration with the parent or the teacher. Anything else? Okay, you get 2 seconds, and then we're moving on. Okay. So we're going to talk about, okay, you've identified activities, but then, it needs to get deep, and it needs to get big. So everyday activities provide, so you're now talking about how to increase those activities. Provide more learning in the classrooms, again, active participation. And if you start thinking about the concepts of breadth and depth, it begins to help a little bit. So that's what we're going to focus on. So breadth is to provide a wide range of activities that might be the focus of a child's interest. So a lot of different ones, and be able to do it. But depth is then what happens within that activity to create opportunities for that child to explore and expand the behavior while engaging in them. Depth is finding more opportunities within a specific interest-based activity in order for it to be as rich as possible. Okay? So those are two concepts that when you're working with other people, parents or teachers, it's helpful to really have nailed down in your head is what so how can they be looking at other activities that happen where that interest can be as a part of what's going on, and then what happens within it. Okay, in terms of the wide the breadth of activities, not the depth, but the breadth. This is just some research that we did, and I just want to quickly show you this. One of the things that people said to us was that children with disabilities did not participate in many things, that they stayed home and that they weren't very actively involved. And we said, oh, really? Well, let's ask some parents that question. And this was a very large national survey, which was very broad in terms of ethnicity and regionality and all that sort of stuff. These are the activities that the parents identified that their child was involved in which they thought their child would learn. This is not just the activities they were involved in. These were activities that families identified their children were regularly involved, well, not regularly necessarily, because some of them didn't happen all that time, but that their child was involved in, where they felt like their child learned. It's all over the place, folks. They felt like their children were involved in lots of activities in the home and in the community. And in some of the stuff we did, we went and looked at some of the most severely challenged children that we had in the sample and count, because we had parents list them, and we counted. The number of activities that these kids were involved in was enormous, that their families felt like their children were learning from. This isn't just stuff they were doing. It was stuff they felt like their children were learning from. Now, it differed from region to region. It differed from family to family about a lot of this stuff. This is where the cultural diversity really came out, is in the kinds of things that they did. But these kids were very involved. And, practitioners will still say to me in the States, I've got a child that doesn't do anything. They just don't do anything. And I'm sorry, but my reaction is, I don't think you really know. I think you need to go back and have another conversation with families and open that door up wider so that you're asking them different kind of questions to gather that information, because in fact, I think they are involved in lots of different things. Even in severe poverty areas, high crime areas, families have figured out lots and lots of activities that their kids participate in. They may go across the hall to the neighbor's house, to the neighbor's apartment, where in fact they've kind of built an indoor gym. I mean, one of the families said, well, we go next door and we just take the cushions off the couch and we do this, and they let their kids, they created places for their kids to be and their kids to learn, even though they didn't want to go outside because the violence was so bad. These are some of the worst neighborhoods in our country. They're pretty bad compared to yours. So anyway, so this notion of there are lots of activities, I think, is one we just got to give up. We're not asking the right questions. We're not making people feel, they think it's got to be something more formal or whatever. All right, we're going to real quickly, if I can make this happen, stop and watch a video. Now, this video, I'm sorry, the quality is not great and the Southern accent is intense. So, you're going to take it for what you can get out of it. This is a video of a grandmother who is cooking with her son. It got videotaped because the mother said, he just doesn't do anything. He just can't do anything. And the home visitor had happened to watch this grandmother do this activity. and said, would you do this with him? So to help the mother kind of see all the things this child could do. And so we're talking about depth. In one activity, all the things that this grandmother gets this child to do.
Okay, come here. Okay, we're gonna make pudding. Okay, can I help you? Okay, here's the, what is that? Cup. Okay, that's a cup. Go, and this is the, whisk. You wanna go put that over on the table?
We clearly didn't script this.
Okay, and get the bananas. Bananas. Okay, you got them? Take them out. Okay, go put them on the table. Okay, let's see what else we need. Did you get them on the table? Okay, we need cookies. Sorry. Can you pick it up? Okay, thank you. Okay, you want to get this box? We'll use these cookies first, because that's the ones we use a lot. Okay, thank you. Okay, pudding. We need pudding. Pudding. Oh, yeah. Keep mixing.
Sorry, there's another kid in the background.
Yeah, Grandma will help you if you get tired, okay? Keep stirring. We have to mix it all up. Stir.
Oh, I didn't do anything. I have no idea what I did. I don't think I... Okay. I stood here.
Ask Mama, honey. Ask Mama. You have 4.
Okay, so... Yeah? We can see it here. Yeah, get closer if you want.
I mean, you get.
I didn't touch a thing.
Oh, you got too many. Okay, count and see how many that is. 3, 4. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay. Did we lose everything now? Okay. All right. Well, while they come and do whatever magic they can do to make this work, we'll talk about it. You got the essence of what she was doing. So, oh, yeah. I didn't mean to touch anything, but I didn't think I did touch anything, but I'll move back over as soon as she finishes. So in this process, that grandmother was doing a tremendous amount of things within that one context. Now, how would you identify what skills she was training? I mean, she was doing lots of skill development stuff. And as part of that, you will not see that clip either in the stuff we created. They liked it, but they want their own clip of that. So they're going to find one that's got the Australian slant and doesn't have the accent as part of it. Now, I have something there. That's not what it's supposed to be. The mouse is up here. It's right there. So I was watching that video. Oh, good. Okay, this is good. Okay, now go to, yeah, you're fine. I can take it from here. I can do this. Great. Sort of, hey, y'all are laughing at me. Okay. No idea what I did. Okay. So there were lots of things that the grandmother did in that. And I bet you could come up with 10 or 15 other things that could easily be added to that. And you couldn't have had a more motivated child in terms of what that child was doing. And he goes on in the video to count. The grandmother knows that he counts up to 4. So they counted up to 4 over and over again until he reached in and got a whole handful. And so, you know, it really is. And then again, helping somebody see that that's what you're looking for within an activity. And not that every activity can have, I mean, that went on for a long time. But within even short activities, you can have that kind of opportunity for kids to learn. And I think the thing that is so powerful about that is that you saw so many skills that child was practicing. He was running back and forth across the room. He was carrying things. He was picking up stuff. Tremendous amount of language, gross motor, all kinds of things going on all at one time. And as John said earlier, that's really how children grow. That's really how they operate. They don't operate in these slices of skills the way we talk about it. They operate in this much larger context, and that's how they really learn and develop. Okay. Okay, so any comments about that video or anything you want to just say about that notion of depth and breadth? Okay, all right.
What did mother mean when she said he didn't do anything? What did she actually mean?
I think what she actually meant is he didn't do the things I want him to do. So, you know, he's not a terribly compliant child. So in that situation, he was very compliant because he was very interested. But when it comes to stopping and not doing and that sort of thing, the notion of following his lead and his interest was really not part of how she thought about mothering. And so he was a very non-compliant child for her because she never sort of, and that, I'm not blaming mom. She had another baby and yada yada. I mean, lots of other things that was part of it, but she had never thought about this idea of just following his lead and having him be, and starting with something he was really interested in. He's very compliant in that situation, you know, taking things back and forth, but that's because it's what he wanted to do, you know, and I think there is this headset of parenting that sometimes kind of gets into it. Parenting, and you know, it is a cultural issue in our country to some degree. You know, you do it because daddy said that's what you're supposed to do and you sit down and you be quiet. Having to change around that's not a parenting paradigm that is as successful. And sometimes, with some kids, it really is not successful because it's not their temperament or because of the disability or whatever. So, I think that's what she meant. I didn't work directly with this mother, but I think that's what she meant. Okay, so we're going to talk about adaptations. Now, this is a slide I really wanted to change around, and every time I started messing with it, I just messed it up. So the things are not in the same place. The circles aren't the same exactly, but anyway, you get the idea. The idea is that part of what has to be done in order to create active involvement is that adaptations have to be made for kids to be able to be part of it. We use work based on Pip Campbell and Suzanne Melbourne's work, Kara's Kit, which is it's basically classroom-based predominantly, where they talk about adaptations, and they talk about adaptations as a continuum. So where you're moving from a continuum of starting by adapting the environment and going down to actually providing physical assistance. And their argument is you should start at the top and do the least invasive adaptation necessary. So begin by thinking about what needs to be done to the environment so the child can freely move and participate in it, and then move down the continuum to actually physical assistance. And that's a last resort because a child cannot be independently participating if you've got your hand on his hand. That is not independence. Sometimes that's what has to happen to begin the process, but it's not the first thing that you should go to. And historically, it is the first thing that we often go to. Now, I think the exception to that rule is that when you're working with visually impaired children, some hand-under-hand assistance to help them be able to begin to get the stuff is important. But that doesn't mean every single activity. That doesn't mean all the time. That just means that there are times when that has to happen. So in terms of this, and you will not see this continuum either, I don't think, in the final development because people wanted to combine things differently. But this is what, again, the whole point of this is participation. The whole point is kids being able to participate. One of the very interesting things that happened when we were working on this was they all sort of started saying, okay, well, we need to think about the most severely challenged children we have and what adaptations we need to make for them. And then, as I broke them out in groups and made them work with this stuff a little bit, they were in 3 different groups, not communicating with each other. All 3 of the groups came back immediately and said, no, we need to provide a list of the things that people do as adaptations all the time for all children as the first thing we present about adaptations. So that helping people understand, mothers, that we adapt for children all the time. We adapt environments, we pick up the things high so the 2-year-old can't get to them. We adapt and do these things for all children all the time. It's just perhaps more or slightly different kinds of adaptations that we're making for kids. So the notion of adaptation is not a negative because a child has a disability. We're adapting for children all the time in our work with kids. This is just thinking systematically about it in order for children to be able to participate. And I think that's the really. So the environment is just modification, and there's nothing magical about the framework in terms of what goes in what category as far as I'm concerned. It is the idea that you're starting broad and you're making it as, quote, normal as possible and moving down to more things that makes that child look different or unique. So you're modifying the environment. You're rearranging the furniture, arranging play areas that kids can access. You're using mobility devices or specially designed equipment so that a child can get in and out of something the way they want to. So yeah, the equipment is special, but what you're doing to the environment is making it so that is there in order for a child to be able to access the activity. The equipment's not the issue. The equipment's not the magic. The magic is getting a kid to be able to get to where they want to go to be part of something. And that they can do it as independently as possible so that they're doing it again at independence as possible. Adaptations to routines and activities, selecting an activity that is routine based on a child's interest. There's a great clip that we were looking at, it comes from some stuff by Virginia Vicey, of a group activity in a daycare center where the book that is being used is a book that was developed for the child with disability around his particular interest. So it was an interest that this child really had, and they developed this special book for him. But all the kids were sitting there looking at this book. This was a book that was just being used as part of book time. But it was a book that they knew this child was going to like, and therefore he was sitting through the whole activity with no more support than any other child. So it's an activity that was based on his interest. It's good for learning for everybody. So that, as opposed to saying, I'm going to develop a book and take a child over here and do it by himself, that child's just as involved in that activity as anybody else. So it's a great little vignette in terms of kind of switching your brain around about how you think about these things. In child care centers, kids, you're trying to encourage participation in social relationships. Starting with children's interest, which are often the interest of a whole bunch of other kids, is really a good way to do that. And it is an activity modification. Adding motor movements to telling stories, hand motions, that sort of stuff. Oftentimes you can get children, especially kids who are not following the story, to be able to stay connected with it as part of it. So those are adaptations. That's simple adaptations. Materials, modifying them, drawing materials, using big crayons, big markers so kids can grasp things, using slant boards or something to hold the paper. Those are material adaptations. Again, you're trying to set it up so that the child is as independent as possible. And then instructional modifications, reducing the number of steps that a child's expected to perform or the way in which they perform those steps, adding pictures to instructions so that a child has a visual cue about what it is. Those are modifications. And then the last is physical assistance. And again, there are times that you have to do this. I'm not suggesting that you're not, but it needs to be as a last resort so that kids can be as involved as possible. And this doing an activity while a child watches. They're just not going to learn as much. You know, that doesn't say they won't learn anything, but active participation, hands-on, engagement, getting messy, getting down and dirty is how we learn to do the things we enjoy doing and increasing that, and this is a way to do it. Okay, so, good. I really am going to make you go back into one more group just real quickly here, because I want you to take an activity and I want you to think about these adaptations. And I want you to think about what would you do to adapt one of the activities that you've been thinking about for this child, and where that would fall into, and what on the continuum would you use in order to be able to keep that child as engaged as possible in that activity with as much independence as possible. Does that make sense? I think I'm getting tired. Pick an activity. I'll go back and put the continuum back up. Whoops. All right. I'll go over here and do it. So the last time, in just about 2 or 3 minutes, think about it real quickly, and then I just want to hear your reactions to it, and we'll wrap it up. Let's get back together. Do you want to get out on time? So I just kind of want to how easy or hard was this? It was easy? Yeah. Why do you think it's easy? It's very much part of who you are and how you think about things. It's very much part of who you are and how you think about things. So it comes pretty naturally to you. This is, again, where that may not be true for the teacher that you're working with or for the parent that you're working with. And your goal is not to walk into that classroom and figure out what the adaptation is. That's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to walk into that classroom and help that teacher figure out what that adaptation is. You need to take this knowledge and this information that you have and help somebody else learn how to do that. So that's a big shift. Yeah?
I think the useful thing there too is to let the teacher also know this works for everybody in the
Right.
group. The adaptation is not just for
Right.
the child
Right.
with a disability.
Right.
So how can you present that as something that's workable for everybody?
Yeah, and that was exactly what this group came back to, was this adaptations are about for everybody. And so it's, yeah, I think that's really a good point. Does it help to think about the continuum? You know, when I taught, I jumped in at the end of that continuum, you know, all the time. I was in there with physical assistants all the time. But the idea of backing up and thinking about what needed to happen first at the environment. And again, I think we kind of intuitively know that, but boy, you should not expect that other people understand that. Because they don't understand how critical the active participation of the child being in the activity is. They think just being there is enough. And so this idea that it's the active and independent is so critical that helping them understand the continuum is a way of trying to get that language, because you really want him to have his hands in that same water table that everybody else has got their hands in. How do we make that happen? That's really what we're trying to do. So I think that's another knowledge shift that we kind of intuitively have, but may really not be part of it. And I think when we see kids sitting around the edges of classrooms, it is because somebody doesn't understand two things: how important it is to be actively involved and how to make it happen. And that's where our knowledge comes in. Yeah?
I think there's a lot of assumption based on the disability, and I think we
Right.
don't understand what capacity the child is necessarily.
That's right.
Don't give them opportunities.
We don't give them the opportunity because we don't assume that they can be actively involved, and they clearly can. So I think that Pip and Suzanne's work, and there are lots of other frameworks that talk about it as a continuum, but I think thinking about that has been terribly helpful in my work to sort of think it. So we're back here. It's all together, except I couldn't get the little adaptation pieces in there, so it's not on there. We will send the PowerPoint, and I have a bunch of references here. I apologize, they're not in good APA style, but that's the best I could do with the little computer I was dealing with and the size of the print. So, and here's my contact information. So if you're interested in more information about anything or have questions or can't things, let me know. But let me say, please give me a context in which you're asking for it. Don't just say, I heard you speak and I want to know a little bit more about this. Give me the context so I'll have some way to sort of help you kind of get the information that you want. And so I'm going to turn it back over to John, and he's going to wrap it up. And he has 4 minutes left. So.